Your speaker is, or you could please like one in the back.
Ready. Okay, I have 8:30. We will call the legislative committee meeting to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let me say good morning to everyone. Meeting was moved up from the 24th of January to this date to accommodate the urgency and time requirements of a resolution referred back to this committee. So that's why we're meeting a couple of weeks early. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of October 24?
Excuse me.
I have a motion and a second. Are there any corrections?
I have corrections to the approval of the May 23rd minute. Item 3. The motion was made by Cox and seconded by Colton Challenger.
Item 3. Okay, so the second is the incorrect.
Both are incorrect.
Okay.
The motion was made by me and seconded by Mr. Challenger.
Thank you for that correction.
I can get that done.
Clerk will so note. Okay, I have a motion to approve as amended, I assume. And a second. Second. Any further discussion or changes? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no opposition, motion carries unanimously. Public comments. Let's start with Zoom. Do we have anybody on Zoom that wishes to comment on today's agenda?
Do you have the screen available, Mr. Chairman?
That's good.
Okay, say again.
Do you have the screen available, Mr. Chairman? Am I the only one with my hand raised?
I believe we are recognizing Zoom. Yes, so you'll be in order, sir. Who's first?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Conley Hanson, District 26. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I want to speak about your item number 6, the resolution 151. I really approached this with some pragmatism and very methodical in my decision making. And I supported this resolution coming back to your committee, and I amended for judiciary as well. And the reason that I did that is because of the February 2022 memo signed by Winnebago District Attorney Christian Gossett. There is definite movement happening in regards to cannabis, marijuana, however you want to label it. Most interestingly note, since the January 3rd meeting that we had, where this was referred back to the committees, the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel on the 6th of January, Molly Beck wrote an article that there is definite movement in Madison right now to address this. Assembly Speaker Voss has shown support for medical marijuana, and Senate Majority Leader Devin LeMahieu has now softened his position. So it looks like this is going to be on their agenda. But going back to the memo by Christian Gossett, cannabis is far more complex than the 4 bullet points that are on this resolution. For example, Delta 8 THC is currently legal to possess in the state of Wisconsin. Options Lab that does testing for our district attorney is in the process of validating tests to be able to distinguish Delta 8, Delta 9, and CBD, as well as possibly Delta 10 or THC. So I will reserve the bulk of my comments for the judiciary meeting tonight. of my findings, but because of the directive by the District Attorney of Winnebago in February 2022, and now possibly more important because of the definite movement in Madison, I don't think this resolution is necessary to pass to put on the ballot because it is far more complex, and I ask this committee to please vote no.
Thank you for your comments. Anybody else on Zoom that wishes to address the agenda?
How about Supervisor Dowling?
Pardon me, I can't hear you.
Supervisor Dowling.
Supervisor Dowling, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rachel Dowling, Supervisor for District 1, 642 De Pere Street in Menasha. I wanted to speak about Resolution 151 since I was not able to the last time it was discussed during our meeting. Whether we admit it or not, our approach to healthcare relies heavily on an honor system. We have an honor system when we ask people if they're actually taking their medications. We have an honor system once a prescription is written and filled, hoping that the person takes the correct dosage as prescribed by their doctor. The honor system goes beyond prescribed medications because anything we put into our bodies, including drinks and food, also comes with their own list of reactions. A doctor recently wrote me a prescription for a new medication, and I'd like to share some of the side effects with you that were normal and expected. Liver damage, nausea, headache, fatigue, insomnia, dizziness, depression, and anxiety. However, the medication also came with a list of serious side effects, which included confusion, hallucination, blurred vision, and severe vomiting. Because the medication prescribed to me had a wide range of side effects, it was advised that I not drive for the first 2 weeks while taking this new medication. No one from the doctor's office called to check in on me. The pharmacy didn't call to check in on me, and I was left to the honor system. It was up to me to be honest about how I was feeling and to take that into consideration. Looking at statistics, we can see that Wisconsin has a drinking problem. We probably all know this. 7 out of the 10 drunkest cities in America come right from Wisconsin. 4.3% of Wisconsin residents have a first offense DUI. In fact, the State Patrol reports that in Wisconsin, about every 3 hours, someone is injured or killed in an alcohol-related crash. After a little bit of searching, I was able to find the opioid statistics for Wisconsin. I was very shocked to learn that in Winnebago County, residents were prescribed 3.5 million controlled substances. I was even more surprised to learn that these 3.5 million controlled substances were prescribed in just 3 months. Cannabis can be used in a variety of ways, including oils, creams, edibles, and even used for clothing. While cannabis isn't a miracle drug, it's natural with far more benefits and less side effects than traditional prescription medications. I don't see an outrage over controlled substance abuse. I don't see an outrage over Wisconsin's long history of drinking problems. How can we as residents of Wisconsin be upset with the idea of cannabis when we have residents who aren't following the honor system when it comes to drinking and prescription medications? So I'm asking you to support Resolution 151. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. We have additional speakers on Zoom, and the next one would be
Deb Martin.
Deb Martin.
Hello, Deb Martin, 164 Wildwood Drive, Oshkosh. I would speak in favor of the resolution as well. The last people had some great statistics, but I would agree that alcohol is a huge problem in our state. I've been part of Al-Anon for decades, and I think we are kidding ourselves to say that marijuana is somehow worse. I'm not saying that we put a resolution about alcohol, but I am saying that why arrest people for marijuana when we have so many of these other issues as well. And I have one personal story. My son, who is now in his 40s, when he was in his early 20s, he was diagnosed with cancer. And he didn't tell me this at the time, but later he did tell me that one of the ways that he was able to tolerate the rounds of chemo and the surgeries was he did use marijuana at that time. It is not something that he continued to use in his later, so far the rest of his life. So just one personal example of how it was helpful. When I hear all the side effects for the drugs that was previously mentioned, yeah, anyway, I urge you to support in favor of this resolution. And I thank you for all of your service to our county.
Thank you for your comments. Do we have another on Zoom?
No. No.
I am told there's nobody else on Zoom that wishes to comment. We'll go to the audience. Anybody in the audience wish to speak? We have our district attorney who wishes to give us some comments here. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just with regards to the cannabis ordinance, I don't take a position one way or the other, but I wanted to make some information available for you just so everybody understands what's going on with this if the state legislature would be to act. Obviously, this is something where it's not completely controlled by our county. It's something where the proposal would be to give some directive to the state. So first, the memo that Supervisor Hansen had referenced, that was from last February. That was my office essentially saying that we're not generally prosecuting marijuana possession cases. So as far as possession of intent or delivery, nothing changed there. But for personal use cases, we aren't really involved in those anymore, absent some sort of special circumstance. And one of the big things that we went into as far as why that was happening was the emergence of Delta 8 and Delta 10. So for people that are not familiar with those, these are things that are being sold in our area now, and that was kind of growing right around the time that memo came out. We were starting to see those more frequently, and those are lower strength versions of what we normally hear is Delta 9 THC. That's the illegal version. Delta 10 and Delta 8 are legal right now. The estimates, I don't know if there's a scientific way to go about it, but some of the estimates have suggested that they are about 1/3 as impairing as Delta 9, so they're kind of lesser versions of the illegal stuff. But one of the problems that created is a difficulty for law enforcement and even for labs to distinguish between the illegal and the legal versions. And so the Supervisor Hansen had referenced the Options Lab, which is the lab that we primarily use for our urine testing. And we have controlled substances that are seized by law enforcement, both with the crime lab, but Options Lab tests our urine samples when UAs are done. So as of right now, neither of those agencies can distinguish. It sounds like Options Lab is close to being able to distinguish Delta 8 and Delta 9. The crime lab, I don't know if they are pursuing that, but as of the last time I heard, they weren't getting involved in that. We did find a private lab that is in Wisconsin. We sent, I believe, 2 samples to them for testing on cases that we were interested in pursuing. So there's an option there, but it's pricing. So when we send things to the crime lab, we don't really pay for that, at least not directly. But if we use a lab like the one that we sent things to, we do pay directly. I believe it was a little over $200 for a test. And so what we concluded was it just wasn't worth pursuing these personal use possession cases if it was going to be that cost. There were some other factors that led into those things as well. And there are challenges for law enforcement too. If they're on the street trying to, at the scene of a traffic stop, for example, decide whether something's legal or illegal, it looks the same, it smells the same. Even scientists aren't often able to tell the difference. So how are they supposed to be able to tell the difference? So there are some practical problems there. And so that led us to say we're not going to charge them as criminal. There still can be citation for them, so it's not like that didn't effectively legalize things. It just said we're not going to be charging possession criminal. If somebody's selling, then that becomes easier for us to justify the increase in cost. So and we still have to charge some of these cases. So a couple other things I wanted to reference. There has been some concern expressed about adulterated products, and so I think everybody's probably heard about fentanyl being in other substances. We see that frequently with methamphetamine or with heroin. We haven't really encountered that. I've heard of a couple of situations outside the county where fentanyl was in marijuana. We haven't really seen that. So it's a possibility, but it hasn't been something we've been running into regularly. So I guess I would just suggest that that's a risk, but it hasn't been a common thing. The enforcement by law enforcement for marijuana cases has declined over time, even before we had written that memo last February. So in the few years, I believe it was a 4 or 5 year period leading up to that, we were seeing about 1/3 of marijuana possession cases that we had been seeing previously. So law enforcement, even on their own, I think had reprioritized things a bit, and they were doing a little bit less marijuana enforcement. So it's still out there. They're still seizing marijuana related items, paraphernalia, and marijuana itself. But we were seeing less of that, and now we've told them if they encounter it, they should write a ticket rather than send it criminally, and that's basically what we've seen happen. And when we announced that, it I guess really didn't seem all that controversial. I thought there might be some reaction from law enforcement. We didn't really see that. So I think that this has been kind of a gradual shift over time to treat it less harshly, even if it's not going to be legal, just to treat it differently because there are other things that really require law enforcement attention and the court system's attention. So all that said, I don't have a strong position at all on what happens with this resolution or whether it's legal in Wisconsin, but I just want everybody to be aware of what we're doing here, which is different than what some other counties are. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments? Supervisor Jeffrey, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm here to speak in favor of this resolution of 151. A bit of history for some of the newer supervisors. This was a similar resolution that's been brought up. This is quite literally the third time that this has been brought up in the county. This was brought up back in 2018, I believe. That was introduced by then Supervisor Aaron Wojciechowski, and then I brought this resolution forward a couple of years ago. It did go through the committee. It went through the legislative committee, went through the judicial committee. They both voted it down, but when it got to the county board, it was voted down by only 2 vote margins, so a very slim margin. Per what previous Supervisor Hanson was saying, that there is right now, looks like the state legislature is looking at approving medical marijuana. And with that, knowing that going forward, I think there's still some people out there, our constituents, people that we serve, might still feel that recreational should also be legalized as well. That's the purpose of this particular referendum, is to gauge voter opinion. Now, I fully understand that it's a non-binding referendum, so that means that it's not really going to affect law or the legal process. It's not going to affect policy, and so I get that. I think that there's some issues that are an exception in the sense that there is a disparity between the viewpoints of our constituents versus the policy of our current government. And that's why I feel such a referendum is important, to figure out what our constituents actually want. And at that point, then we could use that as a way to shape our own policies, not just on the state level, but also here on the county level. Now, we do have a county code in regards to the possession of marijuana. I actually have it here in front of me. It's code 9.17. And it lists here the penalties for violation of this section code. It specifically addresses possession of marijuana. And it cites the state statutes as penalties for that particular substance. And that also includes possession of drug paraphernalia too. So if this referendum were to be voted down, or if we decided to vote against it and it doesn't actually make the ballot, there's still something that we should probably look at here on the county level, especially knowing that that the state is going to be making some changes in regards to medical cannabis. So with that going forward, I'm on the Judiciary Public Safety Committee, and that's something that the Judiciary Public Safety Committee can do, is take a look at the penalties for marijuana going forward. So that way it doesn't actually cost the taxpayers any money by putting it on the ballot. And that way we can adjust what not just what our constituents want, but actually kind of more make it in line and parallel to what will be newfound law. So so I just wanted to provide you with my feedback on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian, for those comments. Anybody else from the public or the audience wish to speak in regard to the agenda? Hearing none, we'll close that portion of the meeting, and we will go to correspondence. there any correspondence? Does the clerk have any? Okay, hearing none with correspondence, we'll take up action item number 6. Let me speak to this as chairman. Couple of things I need to clarify. First of all, the referred resolution back to this body is really not questioning what we individually think about the substance marijuana. The question before the body is, should we recommend that the residents of this county, our constituents, be given the option to vote on this? That is the intent of the resolution. Having said that, I also would not accept an amendment to this resolution. This is a finalized resolution referred to this committee, defined by the document itself. If it is to be amended, it needs to be done on the county board floor, not by this committee. With that understanding, I'll accept the motion.
You're not making a motion to approve the resolution 151-122-022 as presented.
I have a motion to approve. Do I have a motion second? Second. I have a motion and a second. Okay. It's open for discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll be very quick. I'm bringing this forward for a couple different reasons. I don't want to get into debate, the legal, non-legal debate. I said at the county board meeting, that's not why I brought it forward. That's why I would continue in the past. I brought this forward and I brought it for now, as I said, I heard during the governor's campaign, I heard the governor say he was going to maybe present during, if he got reelected, which he did in his budget, and he wanted the legislature to act on it. I'm bringing it forward because I think our constituents should be able to vote on this matter, even if it's an advisory. As recently as November, this is a that got to vote on it. We have not gotten to vote on it, but places like Brown County or Muskegon County have. I think our residents should have a say in this, but have this advisory referendum on the ballot. It's advisory because that's the way it is in the state, not because I like it. Is why I think it should be had. Let's, the reasons for, against, the legal and non-legal. If we put it on the ballot, we're gonna have a whole debate and we have a discussion about that afterwards during the campaign. But right now, I think what I want to focus on is whether or not we should give our citizens the right and the ability, like other places in this state, have to vote on it. That's why I'm moving this forward. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments. Anyone else wish to speak? Supervisor Hicks.
Thank you, Chuck. One of the, and I said this at our meeting, one of the big reasons I voted for this coming back was because I had issues with how this was constructed. And we wanted it to come back to committee so that it can get cleaned up and come back to the board as a better document. I believe that was how more than just myself felt on it. And I have a problem with the first issue right out of the gate. The reason for putting this out there is to significantly increase state and local tax revenues. That should never be the reason that you do any legislation or grant somebody freedom or the ability to do something. It shouldn't be to increase state and local revenues. It should be because it's the right thing to do. And I also have issues with none of the above appearing on a ballot. Imagine if we had none of the above in our presidential elections every 4 years. None of the above will win more elections than an actual candidate. That's just, you have to have, if you're going to have choices on the ballot, and then I hear that this is an advisory referendum, so it has no teeth. So why are we really putting a referendum forward when we know that there's movement at the state level? It says right in this that Governor Evers has stated that he wants to bring this forward. I don't understand necessarily why we need to do this. It's not that I'm against the people speaking their mind. I fully for that. But not as this is constructed and not with the #1 reason being to increase revenues.
Your comments suggest that if this is brought back to the floor on the county board, you probably would offer amendments.
Probably, yes.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
I would just like to
Supervisor
say,
Finn.
I'm interested in what the people of Winnebago County would think. I mean, I would vote for the medical marijuana. My dad was basically, he had severe arthritis. He was taking 8 oxycodone a day. I watched him go from 204 pounds down to about 130, and he still was in substantial pain. And all he ever said is, I sure would like to try that medical marijuana to see if I could get some relief. You know, so I don't know what this is going to hurt. It's going to cost a few cents to print these ballots up. The ballots are getting printed one way or the other. We're adding a couple lines on there and asking our constituents of Winnebago County what they would basically want to approve or not approve. So it's really no cost to the taxpayers other than a little bit of ink. The ballots are being printed one way or the other, and we're going to get the information from our citizens, which basically elected us to give them a choice. I mean, we represent them, but don't we want to know what they really think? I mean, I do. I want to know what the people of Winnebago County think. Do they think that this is something they would be interested in? And then the people in the state can basically sit down and say, well, this is what the people want. And if they represent the people, they'll do what the people want because they put them in office. So I'm in favor of the advisory referendum. It has no merit other than information for us to know what our constituents are looking for.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes, sir.
So I originally do that, I referred it back to committee at our last board meeting, well, December board meeting. I had a lot of issues with how this resolution contradicted itself. And this, specifically looking at line 15, where it did mention the governor wanting to bring this forward as a part of the next state budget. And as it says, put legalization of marijuana in the next state budget, but then we found out the day after, actually, or the day before we heard this in our board meeting, he had actually tweeted out that he wanted full recreational legalization. And so with his tweet, as well as the question stating giving options, are we supporting the governor's stance of full recreational marijuana, or are we still putting that option out as well? This is what the governor wants, but maybe the county wants something different. So ultimately, I think there's some language cleanup that needs to happen. Again, I will more likely motion forward at the next board meeting to clear this up. So
Offer an amendment.
yes, yes, sir.
Any other discussion? Any other discussion? I would like to thank Mr. Bender for his comments. They pretty much would mimic my personal comments also. Once again, any other discussion before I call the question, and we're going to call the roll. Any other discussion? Comments from the committee members? Hearing none, Mr. Hens.
I just want to add one thing.
Yes, sir.
Support or non-support of this has nothing to do with your stance on the issue. This is simply about asking the question of the voters of the county.
Exactly.
And we get a lot of discussion getting off the track on the legality of it, and at the end legalizing, and that is not what this vote is about. This vote is just about putting this forward to the people. Not right. About legalizing marijuana.
Thank you. Well said, sir. Any other discussion?
Actually, I'm sorry, one more thing, and I'll get mine brief.
Supervisor Stafford, Chairman of the Judicial Committee, and I believe you're having a meeting tonight also to address this.
I am.
For
so
clarification.
I'll keep my comments brief. Just 2 things. I want to just mimic what Supervisor Hinton said. Looking at this, when we discussed this at JPS, it's going to be very similar in terms of the approach. So I do want to just encourage 2 things. First is I've spent last week actually going and talking to those within my district. And I actually encourage people to talk to me quite often. And so to Supervisor Bender's comments, I got to tell you that this is a very complex issue. And the mechanism which we're asking, I think, confuses a lot of people. Because I actually had it, what do you think of this? And so there's the medical side, there's the personal use side. When we put this together, it becomes very confusing, and it's not very actionable. And I think it's a concern, because whatever we bring forward has to be actionable and has to benefit at some level the constituency. And I would absolutely encourage, as part of JPS, any sort of conversation around the code update, because that's really where we can make the most benefit of our people. You know, I believe as you look at the different ordinances, even within our area of the state, we are way out of whack. And so I would encourage conversation to happen in that area, and less conversation in this very nebulous, confusing area that we're in currently. And the last thing is I'll just express a little frustration, and that is that we have processes, and anyone who knows me, we have processes in place, and it seems like this has been rushed, and I don't know why. This could have been brought forward to committee November, September, August, over summer. We could have been having this discussion, and I don't know why all of a sudden this shows up in December. And we all have to, you know, stop everything during the holidays and focus on this. And if we would have had time, we could have figured out these issues. We could have had these discussions. But now here we are, holding meetings forward and being very disruptive to everyone's schedule, as well as having something that's really not fully baked. Oh, actually, no pun intended there, but I just want to encourage us to have more of a thought on how these things are developed. You know, in JPS, when I bring something forward, and when I ask our members to bring something forward, and actually Corporation Council can attest to this, I have discussion. There's no vote unless it's really being pushed. There's no vote, there's discussion at a meeting. We discuss it. We figure out, is this something that is worthwhile? And what does it look like? And then there's development. And then at a future meeting, we vote. Now, there's been a few times where they haven't done that, but that's not the process. And I think we need to have more of that kind of forethought and more seriousness when we develop these things. So it's just a little bit of a frustration with me. But with that said, I do want to just make sure this is an opportunity that I think we should be looking at this, and I would encourage conversation beyond this specific resolution to figure out how we can benefit our residents. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir. Any further discussion? Yes, sir.
As a new chair, or as a new county supervisor, you know, I got a lot of thought here and a lot of feelings. I wanted to vote on it way back before. Now it comes to this committee, and maybe I don't understand the system, but now we're in this committee, and it'll probably, either way, it'll probably go back to the county board again. And then the county board will probably slash through some stuff and decide. It sounds like something went through real fast, wasn't any thought. My feelings, I've had tons of calls, and pretty much one third. A lot of medical, older people. Well, I have a lot of older people that are doing marijuana anyway right now, and they from way back in our days. And then I have personal feelings because my son in the past had troubles with this, and it was because of a person that had cancer that was available to marijuana. He knew nothing about it, but because of that opportunity, it was available to all him and his friends, and they just did it for recreation and got tickets, fines, things all over and over again. And it has straightened up since then. So I have a lot of feelings about this whole thing, but I just get the feeling, we're going to rush this, and I don't know if it'll make it to the spring election or not. But based on what my election was, not many people come up for that spring election, so you're not going to get really the toll of the county what's going on or what their feelings are, because only, I don't know, the last time there was 20 or 30% showed up. So if you're trying to get what the county thinks, you're not going to get there. And maybe what we need to do is we should think about this more, talk about it more, because I think it's a state thing. I don't think it's a county thing to keep putting out there and spend time like we did with the 2020, or missed by a couple. I think the people all have their opinion out there. Pretty much they want it, just like they want alcohol, just like all that stuff. It's going to bring revenue. I've heard that side too, that the revenue is going to be coming. It's going to help. It'll also give revenue to help on the side for prevention and education and things like that. But I think it's something that, you know, there should have been a lot more thought. This is kind of going real fast. And I know we want to get it out there and get the opinion, but I don't think we're going to get a true picture of everything. That's just my opinion.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have to respond how
Mr. Norton.
people say this is rush. This was not rush. It may seem rush. Let me tell you, I thought I explained why I'm bringing it forward the time when I did. I did it because I had thought someone was bringing it up beforehand. And when I heard it was the issue, the governor's campaign, the governor coming up, that's when I thought it. That was until October, November. To get on the April ballot, it has to be passed by January. So that's, I figured, I mean, I didn't want to rush in December, but I figured if we put it in December, then at least we have a month that we're doing now to maybe change it. So I don't think it's been really rushed. It's been studied the last few years, more than a few years. It's the same resolution we've had the last couple of years, because we started out with a very simple resolution, and then, if you remember, when Supervisor were on the board, which had reference before, then we added extra choices. But I'm a little offended by this being rushed. It's not rushed, because I really thought someone was going to go forward before that. So that's my comment. So thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Duff. Any other comments? At this point in time, we have an additional chairman that's not with us today. That is Tom Schneider, retired county board supervisor, but he's also chairman of the Veterans Committee. He sent me an email. I would ask the clerk to read that into the record if you would.
During my service in the Navy in 67, 68, and early 69, I have to admit that I smoked enough grass to keep the Wisconsin deer herd healthy all winter. I was very mellow the night before Memorial Day, 1969, when I spent my last night with my friends in the Nave Sec crew and the band I helped found in the Philippines, the Freedom Highway. The next morning, I boarded a plane for the United States. A man came on the PA before we boarded and said, if you have civvies in your duffel, change now. Otherwise, when we deplane in San Francisco, it ain't gonna be fun. I have never touched nor wanted to touch grass since that evening. Of course, that was 60s grass. It has been genetically modified since then, so I can no longer be judged an expert, but hey. Now I want to talk about it from the perspective of my brothers and sisters who serve this country. There are still about 18 of us who commit suicide every day. There are many reasons for this, but one is obviously chronic pain. Cannabis could help. The last thing I'll mention is that the Wisconsin legislature, both the House and Senate, have said that they are open to this discussion. And they also are open to letting we, the people, weigh in on the subject. In that vein, I would like to read this email to the committee.
Thank you. Before I call for the vote, once again, any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none, call the roll if you would.
Supervisor Albrecht. Supervisor Binder.
Aye.
Supervisor Buck. Oh, he's not here. Supervisor Cox.
Aye.
Supervisor Fari.
Aye.
Capra's not here. Supervisor Gustafson.
Aye.
Supervisor Hintz, sorry.
No.
Supervisor Keller. Or what was that? Okay. Larry Lautenschlager.
Yes.
Supervisor Norton.
Yes.
Here, Supervisor Skellinger.
Yes.
Supervisor Stafford.
No.
And Supervisor Harrison.
No.
The nays have it.
Okay, the motion.
5-7.
The motion to approve failed. This will go back, I believe, to the full county board with that vote total. Okay, we will now take up item number 7, and that was requested to be put on the agenda by the administration. I'm sorry, Mr. Norton, that was you, correct? They brought this up. And that's discussion on shared revenue reform. So perhaps you take the lead.
Well, I hope, and were we able to get someone from the WCA, because I guess maybe we could table this, but I know this is a big discussion. We do have some outside legislature. I thought we can discuss. I was really hoping someone from the WCA would be here, because I and we speak college and farmers, I guess, the proposal about some revenue reform. So that's why I brought it forward.
I believe that, was it the governor stated, or was it Boss? Based on an email I got, that they're looking at increasing that about 4%. Perhaps our legislators would comment on it.
The governor made that.
The governor, okay.
There are proposals they're working on. I haven't heard a lot of specifics, but they're looking at tying it to some kind of sales tax, using 1% of the sales tax that currently comes, 1% of the 5, so 20% of that. And tying that to shared revenue in some way, shape, or form. I haven't seen a lot of the nitty-gritty details. It's going to come down to a lot of details. And I always worry when we change something, are there going to be winners and losers? When you make everyone winners, very interesting how that happens. So I haven't seen a lot of the details, maybe you might get seen some, but it is being worked on in the past.
Okay. Representative Shaw.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we've just started having the discussion. Joint Finance has been working on it, you know, for a while. The one advantage of tying it to the sales tax, and there's an advantage and disadvantage. In good times, there's going to be extra revenue coming in because we're taking in more sales tax. The negative is that if the economy goes into recession, we have less sales tax revenue. That is going to affect the 1%, you know, which could actually lead to less shared revenue coming back. So I think there is discussions taking place. You know, one of the big caveats is whatever we do, it affects Milwaukee County. And that's where majority Milwaukee County and the city of Milwaukee. And so we have to be very careful as to how this is negotiated and you know, put into form. I think there's going to be a preference to have some reform come out of it in the sense of shared services. So I think, you know, from what I'm hearing, there's going to be, you know, X amount of dollars from the 1%, and then there will be some incentive for counties, towns, villages, cities to work on shared services so that there'll be another pot of money that will be available for municipalities that you know, look to kind of consolidate, and the money would be available, you know, to help with that. So we're still in the infancy stage of talking about this. You know, we hear a lot from our municipalities and towns and everybody else that, you know, want us to increase shared revenue. And so this is, you know, one angle that has been taken, but like I said, be careful what you wish for, because, you know, when the economy is good, it's going to bring more dollars in. If the economy is bad, it potentially could be less dollars coming in shared revenue.
I have a comment. Ethan, do you wish to speak to this also?
Yeah, I mean, they explained kind of the deal that has been in the works for some time, big leaders and some county folks. Representative Scott's right. This is going to hinge on Milwaukee County and Dane County, what do they get and how the allocation goes, but also our friends in the municipalities and town. So the allocation is going to be really, really important, whether they get on board. The 1% deal was adopted by task force of what is the Wisconsin Institute of Government or something, not CJ's group, but the legislators. Then and Mark Roloff was on that, and they adopted the 1% plan as their preferred proposal. The shared services thing is also in there. There's some quirks in levy limit law that actually hinder shared services, which will get fixed, hopefully in this agreement. But many states that have strict levy limits, Nebraska, Minnesota, and others, they actually have incentives for shared services that Wisconsin does not have. So that's kind of some of the models in York as a model that they're looking at. But beyond what the representative and senator said, I don't have much other than I think the leaders and the county negotiators were pretty close on something. But as Representative Strawn knows, now we have to then draft the legislative language. Once you get to an agreement on this is the principle, we draft legislative language, and sometimes that causes some more issues. But we're basically, I think, to that point where we'll start drafting legislative language, and I think in the budget or before the budget, we'll have some movement on it.
Thank you, Ethan. John, do you have any additional comments?
Yeah, I'd like to echo that. I think we've been working really hard on this behind the scenes, and I think it is close. And Ethan's correct. I think our biggest hurdle will be some of those municipalities and towns. When Representative Straw cautioned that be careful what you wish for, because if the economy gets tight, so does our revenue. I see that as a good thing. Our belts need to be connected to the belts of the American taxpayer. When they struggle, we need to shrink a little bit. And when they prosper, I think that's when we can do some extras. So I would take the opposite, and I think that's a good thing. And we're hopeful this is going. The WCA executive committee has been working hard on this. We all voted unanimously pretty much that this was the route that we wanted to go. Shared revenue's got to happen one way or the other. And I think the legislators know that. I think the governor knows that. And the counties and municipalities and towns definitely know that. So I think we're looking okay.
Thank you. Question for Representative Schwab. Based on your comments, I interpret what you're saying about revenue sharing on future revenues coming into the state. You're talking about the sales tax. Perhaps part of the question is there going to be enhanced revenue sharing with the current budget surplus we have? Everybody's after all that extra money and what is it, $1 billion some odd dollars? Is some of that going to be appropriated for a one-time?
That's one-time money, and there's so many fingers in that pot right now.
Revenue sharing would not be part of it.
Yeah, but there, from what I'm hearing, there would be a held harmless clause so that you wouldn't be, if we would go to the 1%, you wouldn't end up getting less than what you're getting right now. So there will be a clause that will hold harmless any municipality, city, county, state, or whatever to at least get what they're getting now.
Using their surplus to back that promise up.
The surplus is not in, that's not part of the discussion. All right. That $6.9 billion, just as a reminder, are estimates. They're based on, future revenue, and it went from 6.6 to 6.9 here just in the last couple of weeks. It went up a little bit more. But that's all based on future sales tax revenue, corporate income tax revenue. And I think our caucus, at least I can't speak for the Senate, but I know, our feeling is that if we've got that kind of a surplus, that should go back to the taxpayer. So I think a big chunk of that is what we'll be looking at towards giving some tax relief. But I can tell you there's so many fingers in that pot right now. One of my colleagues wants to build a new prison up in the Green Bay area. A new prison is going to cost $750 million, anywhere from $650 to $750 million out of the capital budget. So, you know, that isn't part of the negotiations or conversation is using that budget or that budget surplus. And I think Republicans, one of the reasons why we have a budget surplus is because there's been, you know, our revenues, there's been a lot of work done to get us to this point with a rainy day fund as you know, at the highest level that it's ever been. You know, so knowing what's on the horizon, I think we have to be really careful. Everybody wants to spend that, you know, big, spend it all down. And I think we're in for some surprises. And from what I'm seeing with forecasts for the economy, want to, you know, tread on that water very lightly. So
I think that's very thoughtful. Thank you, personally. Any other discussion or comments before we move on to the next agenda item? Mr. Norton, has this satisfied your concern?
Well, for now, yeah, keep up. Maybe later.
Okay, so you'd like to hear some updates as we go along?
Yeah.
Very good. Hearing no other discussion on that item, we'll go to number 8. And that is a concern of rising cost of stormwater utility for the city of Oshkosh. Do we have anyone here from the city? We do not. This was a requested agenda item from the executive. Do you wish to speak to it at this time? And please come forward if you would. I'm having trouble hearing you. I get hearing aids. Well, maybe tomorrow, I believe.
I just, I felt it prudent for me to make sure that we bring it to this body and our board of supervisors, being as we are the largest payer of the stormwater utility fee in the county. We are definitely that top client, if you would. Some of the things I understand, some of them I don't exactly. I'm not sure why we're paying stormwater utility on a landfill. It's the tarp underneath it. It considers it an impervial surface. So we actually pay stormwater utility on all the acreage that we have for a landfill. That being said, I guess I don't understand the move that well. I know they have quite the surplus in their account for stormwater utility fees. I'm guessing it has to do more with revenue. Because for revenue for them, it makes their bonding better. I don't know, speculating on that. Maybe it's a way for them to not bond for some of the bigger projects they have going on, and I can respect that. My concern is that you should talk about it because we're the #1 client on this, #1. #2, if it's revenue, I'd like to see what's going to happen with the shared revenue discussion. I mean, if some of that percentage comes back, maybe this isn't necessary. And #3, much like we did in our budget this year, this is not the time to raise prices on citizens when butter and eggs are as expensive as they are. Chuck, I believe farmers finally have eggs cheaper than we get them at the store. And that's been a long time coming. So it's something that I wanted you guys to make sure that you discussed in this, and I'm not going to propose a stance for you, but I would appreciate if you could decide a stance on this as a body. I think it's a good thing for us to consider.
Supervisor Norton.
People are for have they done this to the school board on the school district? Because the reason I'm saying that, because I remember back in the early 2000s when state legislation allowed them to do this, I brought this concern to 1 or 2 school board members, and they said, "Well, we'll pay it." So yeah, we may be the largest payer, but also the school district. So I hope that they are reaching out to the school board as well, and I'm prepared. That's my 2 cents in that, because at the time, you know, parks paid a lot, and you know, big charting in their budget, in the airport, so not at the town ways, so
Supervisor Cox.
John, how do they measure this? Is it measured by ERUs? Is it measured to the citizen and to the various businesses in terms of ERUs? What are we comparing it to as far as the raise and compared to other entities in the Oshkosh area?
Well, I believe it's based off of surface area, so that would be correct.
Be ERU.
Yeah, correct, of impermeable surfaces. Where I believe they're requesting a 6.5%.
I was gonna ask that question for the record.
It's increased to everybody at that.
Correct.
All the way across the board.
Correct.
And what's our current reserve? Do you happen to know that?
Their current reserve, Whitmore Center did a study on this. I can't remember the exact number, but I believe it was around 17 million.
17 million.
Yeah.
So they have 17 million in reserves, an established fee, and it's a recommendation before the Oshkosh City Council. Would that be correct?
Correct.
To increase that 6.5%.
And I had to, the MSA by the GNR, it's required every quarter or whatever, a year. That increases as the need affects, the need for clean water, whatever is affected by the amount of runoff that they're getting. So it actually gets an increase at some point, a realistic increase, but where you've got a large amount of money socked away, maybe it's they need additional ponds, maybe they need, you know, what is the reason for them not spending that money and increasing to 6% out of what would be normally probably 2.5 to 3%. Somebody needs to study a little bit.
John, was a representative from Oshkosh invited to this meeting?
I can't remember if I did that. I remember it. I was made aware this would be on this meeting. I take short notice. I appreciate you getting it on. I think we were overwhelmed with trying to figure out a homeless shelter at the time. So
okay,
may have slipped my mind.
And when are they going to be taking this vote, if I might ask?
What's that?
What is the council going to address this?
I believe tomorrow.
Oh, okay, all right.
Mr. Chair, the other reason we asked for this on is the chamber came to us, the county executive read a letter and posted it. And the response we gave the chamber was we didn't think it was appropriate for us to take that position unless the legislative committee at least saw the issue first. So this request is actually on behalf of the chamber. So we have in the packet that memo is what the chamber sent out. Oshkosh Chamber of Commerce is theirs. So they are opposing this pretty aggressively. They asked us to get involved. We said no, subject to all of you being briefed that chamber is requesting this get opposed to this because we a little bit of robbing Peter pay Paul. I think the top 3 payers are us, Oshkosh Corporate Schools. So I mean that impacts. So this is request from the chamber for the executive to get engaged, we get engaged in ending this.
Supervisor.
Chairman, this is a big deal. We talked about this at the airport. The county board talks about this at the airport budget every year as a big expense. The 6.3%, I think 6.5% proposed increase is a big one. But I think there's a lot that we don't know. A lot of the speculation that you were reading into, like, could have very, very valid reasons why why this is the proposed, reserve buildup or whatever for the stormwater utility. I know there was a brief and relatively undetailed clip in the Oshkosh Examiner today that I think alluded to the idea that the reserve was built up to pay, I think as you would mention, to pay for a capital expense instead of bonding for it. So I think our discussion falls sort of in that nebulous realm that you were talking about, Supervisor, about the marijuana referendum, where we don't really know what's going on, and I don't really feel like we should this body should come to any decision or policy when we don't know what the city's intentions are. I also think, lastly, that the chamber's letter is kind of nonsensical. It proposes solutions that achieve different ends for purposes that don't ultimately get to cost savings. So, I don't know if we have an action or anything that's suggested, but I don't feel comfortable with having a discussion without that base level information.
Thank you. This is not an action. It's simply for discussion and information for this body. Supervisor Albert.
This is just a comment. A lot of the reserves from the solid waste are held in reserve for the closure of landfills and for the upkeep after the closure. That's why there's so many millions, and it's required by the DNR that they set that much money aside. It isn't that they have all the money is there, yes, but it's all for a purpose.
Are you saying there might be a similar scenario with the stormwater utility?
No, I'm just commenting on the solid waste thing that I mentioned before.
Final question, perhaps. What's the impact on this county financially? What are we currently paying?
Over $500,000.
Over $500,000. And we did not budget for this increase in our current budget, correct? Okay.
I'll just make one comment. Every citizen in the city of Oshkosh paid the same fees. I mean, I pay $140 a month for my water bill. That's more than I pay to heat my house. You know, what choice do I have? I have to take a shower, I have to cook, I have to basically have drinking water. And it's a fee that is not regulated. It goes by cost. It's not anything we can control. Whatever the city says they need, they have to put the water storage tanks in down by Menominee Park. I don't know how many million those are going to cost. But every time I hear about this storm water, it's like years ago, the storm water went to the sewer, went back to the lake. Now we have to pay or put rain barrels up. We can get a credit if we put rain barrels up. I'm sure we can get a credit if we put more retention ponds on our land. But there's just the cost of doing business, you know, and unfortunately, everything costs money. When you want to basically get rid of the water, the DNR says you have to basically pay so much money. The water we discharge into Lake Winnebago has less phosphorus and nitrates in than what the lake has, yet we're still getting fined for it in the city of Oshkosh. So it's Fond du Lac, you know, and there's ways of treating it, but it's so expensive right now, it's cheaper to pay the fine. You know, even though the water we're putting in the lake is cleaner than the existing water in the lake, we're still being fined.
Thank you, Mr. Cox.
Well, part of that's right. The PSC regulates the amount of cost involved in distributing water out of the utility. And the water utilities are separate from the storm water. The storm water is budgeted and figured out according to what the needs are that the DNR places on you in a given area. And so the town or the municipality builds ponds in various areas to try to cover the issue of drainage and whatever. Okay. The ERUs are based on the runoff and what's being charged them accordingly by the state. Okay, and because of a lack of sharing, okay, those costs continue to rise. The utilities for water, taking your shower and all of that, are covered by a different rule. Okay, you have utility group that is managed and then looked at by the public service.
We get one bill, from one of us on that bill.
Well, your garbage is on that bill as well.
Okay.
The garbage is on your tax bill, okay. But all of those are different shares. They're looked at differently. So let's stay with stormwater, not get carried away in another direction.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Hens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to speak for the city of Oshkosh, but I'm going to speak as somebody who served for 12 years on the city plan commission and had this issue come up an immeasurable amount of time. So, I'm thinking that part of this problem also is the city knows that they have a problem with homes that are illegally set up so that they actually they have tiles in their house and that runs right through the water that goes to the processing plant instead of goes into stormwater drainage, which actually costs more to process because then you're processing stormwater at the water plant that should just be flowing right back out into the lake. I know that is an issue in the city, a big issue because there are a lot of old homes in the city. And I don't know if that's playing a part of this. It wouldn't surprise me if it was. And all the city thinks after being around it for that long. One of my biggest concerns though about this 6.5%, I can speak to you on this because I know you're a small business owner who has a piece of property that's a big parking lot in a building, which is all impervious. And your rates are going to go up immensely as a small business owner. What's going to happen to all these other businesses that are struggling after COVID? And those are, those are the people, people who can, we can be upset as taxpayers at what's going to happen in our houses, but it's going to impact us when we go out to eat. It's going to impact us when we go shopping. It's going to impact all those prices are going to go up as well if they're raising their rates. So it's wide impact as far as this goes. So as far as talking about the homes and the difference and everything, there is a crossover with this in the city because there is a high percentage of homes that they call illegal hookups where they have tiles that run into the water that gets processed at our water treatment plant and doesn't go straight out into the lake and as stormwater runoff. And that's extremely expensive for the city because their system get overrun every time that there's a rain event at the water treatment plant. So just something else to think of and go on and do something about.
Thank you. Is that in from Mr. Albert?
On the city of Oshkosh's water bill is also fire protection added to it.
Any
if I may, I just
John.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to address two things. When I was talking about solid waste, I was simply talking about the stormwater runoff charge on the hill. I wasn't trying to compare to the fund. I just want to make that clear. And Supervisor Bender, there is something you can do about it. You can move. And it's in my hope it's you become Chuck's neighbor out in the town of Inland, or I keep you in the county. And I think that's a concern that I have.
Okay.
I'll just, one comment. We used to get billed for water every 3 months, but as the bill constantly went up, they didn't want to send you a bill for $460 every 3 months. So now we get a bill monthly, and it doesn't seem so bad paying 140, but I used to pay 140, say 5 years ago for 3 months. And they just think it's, well, we send you a bill every month, you won't really notice it so much. But realistically, every 3 months, my water bill would be over $400 probably. And I have 2 people, my wife and I, living in that house. Could you imagine if you had a family of 5 or 6?
I want to thank John for requesting that this be on the agenda so we all can be informed. Obviously, the increase is concerning because it impacts our budget. It impacts our tax levy. So we need to be aware of it. I assume there's nothing we can do about it much, but as costs continue to go up for our county, we have to find ways to either pass it along to our residents, or we're going to have to find a way to cut something to compensate. So I appreciate bringing it forward. Thank you.
Just
One other comment before we move on.
More than anything else. Is this being driven by the city of Oshkosh? Because I know Anita, my water bill is nowhere near what you're describing. So is this an issue that's being driven primarily by the city of Oshkosh, or is this something that we're seeing throughout the county?
I'll make a comment and then defer.
Does this, if I might, does the city of Neenah have a stormwater utility district? That has to be established first.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Without that, they don't have the taxing authority.
Is that okay?
You need to establish that district.
In order to, okay.
And I would defer to Supervisor Hintz here, but this is a dance that has been going on for quite some time. And I know it was one, even on my time as the chairman, I used to be chairman of the Oshkosh Chamber. And it was a ways to figure out for them to pay for roads. Unlike Nita, we also at Oshkosh pay a lot more for road work than you do. So I would defer that to Supervisor Hintz, who's probably a little bit more in tune with that.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I just know that it's always at the forefront of every issue when it came through Planning Commission, everything was water runoff, stormwater impact, and that's like the main focus of everything that comes through planning in the city. Everything. I mean, every business development that comes in, there's a retention pond, or they have bioswales, or they have. I mean, put this in their perspective. I have a family member who bought a piece of land across the street from his business. It was totally empty. There was a gas station for years and years and years, and it's been empty for even more. And he was told he couldn't have people park there because it's a gravel surface. Now that's completely impervious. And the reason they don't want people parking there is because they don't want it to be able to go again and then get in the groundwater and so on and so forth. If he were to develop that small corner parcel, it would cost him 6 figures, and he would end up netting a total of about 12 parking spaces where he could park probably 30 or 40 cars right now. That's how bad it is in the city of Oshkosh. If you were to redo your lot at Zerones, it would probably cost you, I'm guessing, probably about 20,000 or so, maybe 300,000, because you'd have to have islands every 6 parking stalls, I believe it is. Yeah, there has to vegetate. That's how it is in the city of Oshkosh.
Well, once again, before we move on, any other comments or discussion? Thank you once again for bringing forward county executive. I think it's quite informative information. Excuse me.
Sorry.
Yes, sir.
This Whitburn Center analysis. The chamber has been sending a letter out, based a lot of the stuff on that. Does anyone know anything about that? I've never seen that report or analysis about the study saying that they overcharged us for those years, 18 years, all the taxpayers. Does anyone know what that is?
I'm not familiar with it. I assume they're analyzing municipality against municipality statewide and coming up with a conclusion.
I just referred to it as that's the evidence proving that 17 million buildup is because, but I don't know what that is. That would be nice if we kind of knew what they found out, so we know how they're basing it, right? If someone knows about that, right?
Well, I'm sure this concern will be continuing as we go forward. So perhaps the county exec can update us at a future meeting, if you would.
I'll be at the council meeting tomorrow, so.
That'd be good. Thank you. We'll now move on to number 9. Are there any legislative concerns or proposals from the committee to our legislators that are present at least today? Thank you for attending. Anybody want something they want our legislators to consider? Hearing none, we'll move on with that. Obviously, shared revenue is one of those, and we've already discussed that, I believe. That was number 10. An update from our county executive, John Damel.
Guess I went back there for
Yeah.
right. Well, I wanted to thank you all again and the rest of the board of supervisors for ratifying the emergency order. I think we did really good work that short amount of time. David and Warmy Shelter will be resuming operations tonight. They have concerns from some of the people coming back from the hotels. They may have to turn some people away, which are the business. I understand. I do appreciate that they are first come, first served instead of being on a waiting list like pillars. I think that's noble. I think we have some work to do there. Have some concerns, but I think we have some good solutions coming forward. Tomorrow at the council meeting, there's another vote that affects the county. So they delayed their approval of our 980 housing project. So there were some concerns, rightfully so. They wanted to know how come Oshkosh keeps getting these projects. We did give them some numbers to show them that I believe 12 out of the 14 that we've had were from Oshkosh. So I think that's fair. Again, I'm going to remind them that this was sometimes in government, you do things that you have to, not things that you want to. This is one of those. I appreciate and thank the board for approving that project. That was one of the hardest things I've ever had to push behind. It was not something that I asked people to support, but merely understand. So I'm hoping that the council votes in our favor and we can get working on that, because there is a 980 that we're waiting on, and the courts are becoming impatient with us. So we could be looking at potential fines if that happens. Other than that, I think things are going well, and I will echo the sentiment that the discussion behind the scenes on shared revenue have been going very well. And I think we are a lot closer than I thought that we would get, and I thank legislators for that. But then again, there's no guarantees in government, right? Yeah. And that is about what I have.
Thank you. Any questions for the county exec?
I have a question. One of the council members said that one of the conditions they may want to improve of the housing is that they wanted to be informed every time someone was put in there. I guess I was like, that the dictate to us what we could do. We only do, we're doing the same town legislature. So I would hope that we negotiate to kind of like to make sure that the city council doesn't forget.
Well, I think we would notify people anyways. I think we have to. It was the same thing. That was part of the process when we went out to the town of Rushford. We had to notify people. I think my concern with the 980 project is, we're asking to build 11 of these because we never want to have to come do this again. And I think that number may raise some concern.
Thank you, Mr. North. Mr. Bender.
Do you think that they feel like the city of Oshkosh is getting like all these nonprofits, they don't pay taxes, yet we provide police and fire protection? We got the state prison, there's a cost to the city of Oshkosh to have these buildings in their area. And I think that's a concern, that their tax rate, I think we're like 29 something per thousand. Most towns are 12 to 17 per thousand, so we're already like $10 to $12 higher than most other areas. And yet we continue to put more nonprofits. It's taking land up that could be developed to bring in tax revenue. And I think that's part of their concern is, we have to provide the police and the fire protection. And I hear people saying all the time that we don't do nothing up in the Fox Crossings or do anything. Like all these shelters come to Oshkosh. It's not a benefit to get these. I mean, yes, it's nice for the people that are using them, but it's a cost to the city. And I think they're looking at their tax bills are already so high that how many more can we sustain taking basically property off the tax roll? So I think that's one of their concerns, and they'd like to see it more over the whole county rather than basically we got the state prison. Everything that happens, we seem to put on the north end of the county. And people that are living in this north, I live here, you know, I voted for the tiny houses, I voted for the 980. They all are within 4 miles of my house. I realize they have to go somewhere, but a lot of people aren't quite that understanding, you know, they just feel like, you know, we should distribute them throughout the Winnebago County and not put everything in the one part of the city.
I hear that. Growing up as a North Sider myself, we prison, landfill, Winnebago mental health, but the fishing's great. And I get that. I mean, there's some responsibilities of being the county seat. And also there's no land loss here. This was on our land for this project. So I do get that. We made an extensive look throughout the county on other places we could put this. We just really felt that this was the best solution for multiple reasons on this current project. I respect it.
And I voted for it, I supported it. But unfortunately, the city of Oshkosh still provides police and fire, even though it's on our land. If there's a fire, city of Oshkosh comes. If there's a disturbance, the city of Oshkosh comes. Winnebago County Sheriff doesn't come to the if there's a disturbance on there. It's in the city of Oshkosh, and the taxpayers of the city have to fund the cost.
Yes, sir.
This was brought last week at the Human Services meeting, since the Human Services kind of took the charge on the day-by-day warming shelter, you know, whatever. Is the day-by-day shelter trying to ratify the problems that they had with the staffing and with the safety issues or whatever? Because, I mean, chances are this could happen again. I mean, if they don't have the staff that they don't have the safety right now, the main thing is the drug problem in the day-by-day. I mean, are they taking care of that? Do we know?
I believe so. We have given them many recommendations. We've had some highly qualified staff go out there that have taken extensive notes. One of our county employees that have been taking a lot of shifts out there is Kayla Rodriguez. She is a social worker that being embedded with Oshkosh Police Department this year. So she's got a good finger on the pulse. There are a lot of things we want to walk side by side with and make sure that they're that they know about all the revenues that are out there for them, HUD grants and other things. We definitely want to walk with them to make them stronger and to rectify some of the issues that led to this point.
I mean, can continue. Hopefully, they'll continue to work with the Oshkosh PD to have them there, because we had them there every night. You know, 10 weeks ago, you know, or help the manager or whatever. And you know, that's the problem. Otherwise, you know, it could again come back, throw back and on our shoulders again and say, you know, they're gonna look out and say, hey, we help us out again.
One of the things that we are looking at is if we can help put security officers from perhaps the star protection patrol there overnight to make sure that their staff is okay and to make sure that those boundaries are set and firm. The homeless population, you have some people that are simply down on their luck. And when a culture gets out of control, those people that you're most likely to help lift up out of homelessness refuse to go. When you have homeless people refusing to go to a homeless shelter because they're concerned about the population, that's an issue as well. So I think we have made some leaps and bounds with the shelter, and we'll continue to support and walk side by side with them so they can improve their process now and be ready for the new shelter. And I think that's more important.
Yeah, there's a couple of issues that a couple of people on the committee had was with the drug use. It was not so much that when they came in, they had drugs on them, or they turned them over. The Oshkosh PD didn't do anything about it, which is fine. I mean, that's all. The problem was the drug use inside. They were using it inside. They were selling it. They were passing it inside. That was the big thing. And it sounded like the Oshkosh PD wasn't doing anything about that. You know, so that was kind of concerns of the committee. You know, we were running it. All the drug use was going inside. So, all right.
Supervisor Hens.
Thank you. Just to be clear, 980 is not a nonprofit, it's separate from the nonprofit stuff we're talking about. Totally separate. 980 is required by the state, and that will be our deputies taking care of that. That's why we wanted it in their basically in their backyard. I question you on the 980 thing. I mean, we dealt with this in the plan commission, what, 2 years ago, year and a half ago or so, at least. Was the city just waiting on us passing it as far as the county board that long, or did they come back through all those things?
We went back through, the planning commission passed unanimously. It was the city council made a motion. I believe Bill Miller made the motion to defer it to tomorrow's meeting, which was seconded by Councilman Moonbrower.
Okay. I was just curious about that because I know this is something that's been moving around for a while. I know they needed us. The city needed the county to act and get things in place before they could move. I didn't know if they've just been taking it around as far as the city goes. And as far as land goes with the city of Oshkosh, the city of Oshkosh is the last one to complain about anybody doing anything with land in the city because they sat there and rebuilt their garage on a prime piece of real estate, a block off the river, and made it look like a big school. I was one of the planning commission members voted against that. I wanted to see them use the north and south industrial parks, and we could utilize railroads for rented out salt storage space to the surrounding counties. They didn't want to hear about splitting things up. They don't. The city doesn't care what they do as far as this property, that kind of property. They'll take stuff for their own off the tax rolls and not take second about it. That's our city. That's the way they are. You've seen it too. So as far as it, and it's the location with the day-by-day warming shelter, and that was something that came through when we had our workshops on the planning commission. That's down by the bridges. That's where we have a lot of our homeless people at. Down by the bridges, down by the railroad bridge, down by the rail yard, down by Main Street Bridge or Jackson Street Bridge. That's where we have a lot of the homeless people. There are a lot of, I mean, back when I was a kid, there were homeless people living under the bridges over there and living in that wooded area that's behind where the old buck staff was and stuff like that. I grew up with hobos because they used to be a rail yard. But that's an area that typically we have those people in, and that's why the day-by-day warming shelter puts in Swell Pleasant's around all the service. And as as far as the mini homes, well, that's outside the city. I mean, it's in the city's jurisdiction, but it's outside the main part of the city. But it still has bus service and still has access to everything. It's not like we're building all the stuff we're trying to do. What we're trying to help is in one area. It's actually kind of spread out in the city. And again, I'm just glad to see something in the McDonald's kind of spot because it's been around for a long time.
Thank you, Mr. Stafford.
Would you be able to update the board next week on the time meeting? We have a city council meeting tomorrow. So yeah, I think it'd be wonderful if we could get an update on what's happening with that, as well as in JPS.
Maybe the stormwater stuff too. Would you care for me to bring Director Elder for any updates?
That would be fantastic if that's possible.
Good job.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the county executive and his report? Hearing none, we'll move on. Thank you, John. Appreciate it. The next thing on the agenda is number 12, I believe, and that's an update from our state legislators. We have 3 in attendance. State Senator Dan Fine, District 19 Representative Michael Schra, and our new District 54 Representative Nate Gutterson. I'm sorry, I might pronounce that incorrect. I assume you do not have a report, sir. You're probably just getting your office set up.
Just got the office set up. As they keep telling me down there, drinking from a fire hose, learning very quick. Don't really have a choice. The one update I can actually bring is tomorrow. There's actually a judiciary committee hearing regarding bail reform amendment that has actually passed the state legislature last session as well. If it passes, coming up here the next week, it will actually be on the district ballots.
Thank you. You can pick which one wants to go.
Not a lot going on right now. We were sworn in last Tuesday, so the session is less than a week old. There's been about probably 15, 20 bills that have rolled out already for co-sponsorships. As you mentioned, the bail reform constitutional amendment is having committee hearings in the Senate and in the Assembly this week, and will go to the floor for probably a floor session next week.
Constitutional amendment in regard to
bail reform.
Okay.
Yeah, it's what they did talk. It had already passed one session of the legislature last year. Got to pass in the exact same format, and then if that does this year, it'll go to the voters for a final vote on a regularly scheduled election. Other than that, not a lot going on right now. I am chair of the Economic, Workforce, and Technical Colleges Committee. Looking forward to getting back to work in that arena once again, focusing more on the workforce development, workforce housing aspect of it, because you can't do any workforce, you can't do any economic development if you don't have workforce. So we want to focus on getting our good workforce and trying to grow that, but also at the same time, making sure there's affordable housing for workers throughout the entire state. And we're not talking low income housing, we're just talking affordable housing. There's a clear distinction, and when people hear workforce housing, they think automatically the low government subsidized housing. No, this is just getting barriers out of the way so that housing is actually built more affordably. We all know the cost of lumber and all that stuff, so we're focusing on the areas that we can affect.
Thank you.
Let's see, we talked about the budget, constitutional amendment, shared revenue. So just real quickly on medical marijuana, you know, the article did come out from Molly Beck stating that that the Senate is contemplating this and may have the votes. The speaker has tasked 4 of us in the Assembly to be working on the Assembly's bill. And I'll just share a couple things regarding that. We're looking at doing something where the state would do the dispensaries instead of turning it over to a private company, and doing, let's say, 10 to 12 dispensaries distributed throughout the state. There is a push, I think, in the Senate. Mary Felskowski, or Senator Felskowski, worked on this issue last year, and is working on it again, I think, in the Senate. And we're looking at some angles in the fact that we would not have smokable marijuana as part of that medical marijuana legalization. We'd be looking at CBD creams, ointments, edibles, instead of having you know, actual weed that you'd be smoking. The only other issue that I'm working on, I'm again the chair of the Corrections Committee, and we are in a, in my opinion, a crisis level staffing. Regarding staffing, we're in a crisis situation regarding DOC staffing. The starting wage right now in the Department of Corrections is about $20.50. And as Dan mentioned, you know, we were inaugurated last Tuesday. As I drove up on Tuesday and came into Beaver Dam, the Walmart distribution, they had a big semi with a big banner on it announcing that they were starting hiring at $27. I think it was $27.53 or something like that. So we have a real problem that where a lot of our institutions are only at 50% occupancy for employees. We're operating in a lot of cases at 40 to 50% vacancy rates, which is very dangerous, not only for correctional officers, but also for inmates. And we had a bill last session, and Governor actually vetoed it or did not approve it, but then he came out and announced that he was putting ARPA funds into wages. And so every correctional officer received a $4 an hour raise from the ARPA funds, which actually that goes away in June. So if we don't do something to increase wages in June, every correctional officer is going to be looking at a $4 an hour pay cut, and that's just not sustainable. So, you know, I've had Fiscal Bureau working on, you know, doing some analysis of what it would cost us. And we're looking at anywhere from a $4 to a $6 an hour raise for correctional officers. Just to give you an idea on that $6.9 billion surplus, not that we would be taking it from that, but all the fingers are in those pots. Giving that kind of a raise to just correctional officers is going to cost the state anywhere from $300 to $350 million a year to increase wages. Right now, last year we paid $65 million in overtime costs. This last year, the state paid out $85 million in overtime costs. So we've got these guys that have been working, you know, for a number of years in corrections that are just burning out. They're working 8 hours. They're being ordered to work another 8 hours. They go home and sleep 8 hours. They come back in, they work 8 hours, and they're being ordered for another 8 hour shift. 2 16s in a row. And the net effect is that this is costing the state even more. It'll cost us more down the road because our pension system is based on the 3 highest years in the state of your earnings. So a lot of these guys are just getting, you know, they normally made $70,000 a year. Some of these guys are making $120,000, $130,000 a year because they're taking on 2,000 hours of overtime. Part of that is by choice, and part of it is just because there's nobody to work these positions. So we need to do something. We can't close down these facilities. It's not like, you know, a restaurant, you know, we can close down on a Monday or Tuesday. These facilities have to stay open. So we're working on some ideas for the budget for that. And that's what I'll have.
Thank you. There's a question for Mr. Shaw.
I have to just emphasize something. I have a really good friend who is a corrections officer here in Oshkosh. And it is very common, extremely common, that he works 16 hours a day. And like, that's just normal for him. And he's been doing this for years, and he's not the only one. And it really is concerning. I mean, I can see how that's impacting him as a person. Sure. And that's just one. And then you have some people who work at Winnebago, they'll work there overtime, and then they go to Waupun because Waupun offers a premium for other area correctional officers to come and work there because they're even worse off than Oshkosh is. I think Waupun is 50%. They're right at 50. And so it is extremely concerning. And I talk to him on a weekly basis. And he's burning out. Everyone he knows is burning out. And this is something that we need this. I mean, there's no other way around. And there's a safety issue of the employees, but of the inmates as well. And I think there's also concerns on how this is being ran as well. Being from an administrative point of view, there's some, I think, some complexities there that are not helping. And where our focus is from an administrative point of view of the businesses. Yeah. And so I just want to mimic that. I can tell you for sure that
it's something that concerns me and should concern everyone here, especially people who live near these institutions as well, to make sure that these are remaining safe for the community as well. So just a comment. Divorce rates are at an all-time high. Suicide rates are at an all-time high. It was about 3 weeks ago, there was a officer at Dodge Correctional that committed suicide, and you know, a lot of mental health. I mean, you've got PTSD working in these facilities to begin with, and then you add on top of that, you know, the multiple 16-hour shifts. It's breaking families up, and it's not a good situation. There is a lot of recruiting going on right now, but again, it's hard to recruit when you can go and drive a forklift at Walmart distribution in Beaver Dam for $27 an hour.
And you get Christmas off.
Yeah.
No,
Well, the working conditions. I mean, honestly, you have to be a very special person to do this work.
Correct.
I mean, I couldn't do this. There's no way I could. And so it's surprising to me that they're at the rate they are, considering the work that they have to do and the danger they put themselves in.
6 years ago, their rate was a lot lower than a lot. Yeah, Charlie.
Mr. Lockletter, do you have a
Yeah, I mean,
comment?
I definitely agree with the problem. I did it for 34 years. I know I'm retired because I've been tired. And it's not even, but what people really don't understand too is, it's not so much a 16-hour shift. They could work you up to 20-hour shifts. There's nothing says you can't. So what was happening, they were working 20-hour shifts. You were going home, sleeping for about 4 hours, coming back to work another 16-hour shift or whatever. It's kind of like, and I don't like how they're going to ever recruit, because I mean, how are you going to recruit somebody and say, hey, this is the pay now, but in next year it's going to be down $4. I mean, it's kind of like, who's going to go work this and know that their pay is going to get cut at $4 next year?
Why makes budget.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. You have to do something. And it's not even so much even to all the corrections. It's all your states, Winnebago, and Mendota, all those. I mean, they're having problems, you know, doing the same thing. I mean, it's, you know.
Mr. Scott?
There are a couple issues. One, the population incarceration can be cut if there's some diligence put into it to reduce the population and increase the spread of the number of employees in the way that we're just every time we have a high school graduation, a college graduation, we're putting more people into the working force and more people on the roads. More people, more criminals or whatever into the prisons. It becomes incumbent on everybody to try to limit the incarceration of all of these people and limit the amount of prisons that we need to work in and have employees in, which is we're creating our own problems by just.
You have to do some pretty bad stuff to get sent to prison. Yeah. You go to jail first for 365 days, and if it's over that, then you go to prison. You have to be some pretty bad stuff before you go to prison. Right?
Right. You're right.
I think there's a real misnomer that there are low-level offenders in prison, and that we could just release a third of them, and you know, the public would be safe. I don't really think that's the case. I mean, you've got a former correctional officer here. He can tell you, you walk on the seg unit, those individuals should not be released. You know, these are individuals that have raped and killed and maimed, and you know, there are certain things that we can do, corrections reform, that, you know, makes sense, but just opening the doors and saying, well, you know, you've served 10, 15 years, you should be able to leave. Talk to people's families that have been, you know, had family members that have been murdered.
it's a different story. So it's not it's not something that there's an easy fix to, because I get both sides, and I'm probably a lot more open to corrections reform than a lot of my colleagues are. But there isn't a simple solution to it.
And I would say the legislature, Mike is probably most in tune with corrections. I might be second because we have the most correctional institutions in our districts. We have 7 within our districts. So a lot of our colleagues don't have it. Some of them don't have any, so they don't really want to spend money on this. So for us, it's passionate because we need it. So
right. Yeah, these people aren't here. Yeah, you just can't let them out. I mean, it's funny because I serve on human services, and we even talked about, we have one individual right now, one adolescent at Lincoln Hills, and some people on the committee says, "Oh, that poor kid won't be in there." I'll tell you what, you don't get put Lincoln Hills unless you're really bad. I mean, these kids aren't in there because they helped an old lady across the street. I mean, that's it. So you can't. Mike's right. There's not people in there that can just be let out. I mean, without being a danger to society. Right.
Is there any other questions for our legislators?
I've got a comment, Joe.
Yes, sir.
I just say, I think you got your work cut out for you. We pay over $26 for correction officers and we can't get them.
Oh, I didn't. Right.
I had a friend that took a job for us. He worked a year and he went from $26 an hour to 16. He goes, "There's no way I could see myself doing this for the next 30 years. He goes, money's nice, but my sanity is worth more than $10 an hour. He did get back into, now he's a police officer, but he has to go to the academy and we couldn't send him to the academy because we're too short-handed to take somebody out of the corrections and give him that. So he took a job where, he had to sign on for a 5-year and they're sending him to the academy. But he said, "There's no way I could do this correction job for 30 years and keep my sanity." And he was willing to give up $10 an hour to take a job somewhere else. So I think you got your work cut out for you, because even if you go to $26 an hour, and we pay over $26 an hour, we can't get them. So you need basically hundreds of them, and we only need a few and can't find them. I don't know where you're going to find the amount of people that you need. And if you don't go to 26, I would much rather work in the 365. We don't have the type of prisoners you have. They can only stay there for 365 days and they got to go to prison. So we have the lower.
The guy serving in jail.
Yeah. So you got your work cut out, but I don't know how you do it. I really don't.
Well, the struggle is we got businesses throughout this entire state looking for employees who are paying a little bit more, paying a little bit less, whatever it is, but you don't have to deal with prisoners as well. So struggle.
Before I move on, one more call. Any other questions? If not, well, number 13 is an update from our federal representatives, and I believe we have none in attendance. Let me take a minute to thank our representatives for coming, especially on this updated agenda and meeting time. Really appreciate that. Appreciate your attendance. So look forward to meeting with you further down the road. We always meet on the 4th Monday of the month. That's been our schedule. And I assume this disrupted your schedule having a meeting today. But the 4th Monday usually works well for you.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Once again, thank you very much. We have nothing on 13. Let's go to 14. Topics to be discussed at the next Ledge Committee meeting. We normally take referrals from other counties, bring them forward. And obviously we do bring and address issues of importance from both the administration and our separate supervisors if they have a resolution. Is there anything else anybody would like to entertain? Hearing now, we'll just process as normal. Okay, the next one is to set the next meeting date, and that would be the 4th Monday of March. Okay. So put that in your calendars if you would.
March 27th.
March 27th. I'll write that down here myself. Okay, at this point, I'll accept the motion to adjourn.
So move, Mr. Chairman.
Have a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Hearing none, motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.